Okay. Okay, I'm up here in the attic, and I was just about to address the camera just now, and I felt like something was in my mouth, and I thought, oh, there's a hair or like a fiber. There's some, and you know what? I reached, and you know what I found was right on the tip of my tongue, as they say, a little piece of broken glass. I have no idea how that happened. This place is dangerous, folks. Wear protection, for Pete's sake, when you come to the Mask Fan Attic, won't you? I need to find a safer line of work, I think, like wrestling alligators or something maybe, but that's kind of scary when that happens. That's not funny. No, that's creepy. But anyway, tonight's mask is also creepy, a good creepy one. You know, one of the most famous movie monsters of all time is the Mummy, and there have been lots and lots of movies about living mummies coming to life and scaring people, frightening you, the viewer. The first and probably most influential was the 1932 movie with Boris Karloff as the mummy named Imhotep, who spent most of the movie disguised as a normal human being, trying to pass himself off as a living person, with a really bad skin condition, who badly needs some moisturizing lotion, a person who might make people think, that guy is either 3,700 years old, or he's a guy who spends his winters in Ohio, because everybody in Ohio gets the mummy skin in the winter a lot of times because of the dryness and the cold. And where were we? By the way, it's really cold in the attic tonight. Did I mention that? Two kinds of cold, freezing cold and freaking cold. Both kinds. Makes it twice as cold. Anyway, Imhotep was only in that first movie. The later movies were about a mummy called Kharis. And probably Kharis, the Lon Chaney mummy with the one eye closed, he was the one that scared me the most when I was a kid. He was the scariest mummy for some reason. But probably the best movie about a mummy is probably the Hammer version from 1959 that was called The Mummy. And since it was co-produced by Universal, they used a lot of the same character names and mythology, so the mummy in that movie was also called Kharis, this time played by none other than Sir Christopher Lee. Now, if you think you've heard of Christopher Lee, I should certainly hope so. Famous for lots of horror roles, including probably best known for having played Dracula in an entire series of Hammer films. He played Frankenstein's monster in The Curse of Frankenstein, and of course in later years he played Count Dooku in Star Wars, and Saruman the Evil Wizard in the Lord of the Rings movies. So Christopher Lee had one of the most amazing careers of any performer, and when I was a kid, I always loved it when his movies were on. I would stay up late at night to see a movie with Christopher Lee in it. He was just that cool, you know. And when he played the Mummy in 1959, that particular mummy looked just like this. Okay, crusty and dusty and musty and kind of caked with dirt and mud and gunk, and a sort of dark grayish brown color rather than a pale or sandy sort of color like some of the earlier mummies looked in the earlier mummy movies. This was a darker mummy, and he had this sad, faraway look in his eye that made him really mysterious and weird, and man, was he violent. I think that was one reason he was especially effective. He was really violent, and he was strong. He was a huge guy smashing his way through things to get to his victims, and he was a very scary mummy character. Now, the only mask I think I've ever seen of this particular mummy is this one, sculpted by none other than Carol Hicks, who, as some of you may know, is Laura, my wife's sister. Okay, Laura's older sister is Carol. Carol sculpted this Christopher Lee mummy around the 1997-98 period, and Carol is quite the accomplished sculptor in her own right, and has done quite a number of remarkably good masks for the monster community out there. This is one of my personal favorites of her sculptures. I think it just looks exactly like the mummy looks in the movie. It's so close. And even down to this, the detailing and the specifics and the little bits of bandage sticking off in the mud and all that, I think look exactly like it. I think the profile looks like Christopher Lee's profile a great deal. And I think the eyes are just right as far as the expression, you know, rather than having a mean look on his face, even though he was a angry and ferocious mummy, he had this kind of sad, wistful, faraway look because he was deprived of his true love for so many centuries. And that'll bring a tear to anybody's eye. The only other mummy I've seen in a movie that looks a lot like the Christopher Lee mummy is probably the one called something like Sephiroth in the 1980 movie Dawn of the Mummy. Their mummy in Dawn of the Mummy looked an awful lot like the Christopher Lee one. But Christopher Lee is the original color, full color, not a black and white movie, full color movie mummy who was dark and creepy like this and looked like he was all plastered up with goop. Now, this mask was made right here in-house. And by the way, the reason I'm covering this is because of popular demand. Several collectors have said, why don't you do a segment in the attic on the Christopher Lee mummy? So, see, this is in response to that because you asked for it. Well, someone you know did anyway. So here you go, you guys. Here's the scoop on that. Around 1997-98, that season, Carol created this one. It was made here. We only ever made, I don't know, maybe 20 of them, maybe. That's a guess. 20 to 25, I would say, of these out there in the universe. And all the collectors who got them seem to be very happy with it. As I say, the paint job was easy. I painted them, but the paint job was very simple. I just painted black and then sponge paint this brownish gray over that. That's called stippling, stipple technique, or sponge painting, where you dab it on over the black, and then the black shows through in all the little cracks and crevices and holes and such, and then there's very little airbrushing. A little bit here and there around the eyes and such, but it's pretty easy paint job. So the reason this is an awesome thing isn't so much because of my meager attempts with the paint job as it is Carol's spectacularly good capturing of the likeness of Christopher Lee as Kharis, the mummy from the 1959 Hammer mummy. Okay, it's hammer time with this mummy. And one more thing you might not find interesting about this mask is that I actually videotaped when we made the mold on this, and when I would go around to schools and libraries and so forth, which I still sometimes do, to tell them about masks and mask making, usually right at Halloween. People assume I go back in the grave after Halloween, and they only call me in October for the most part. But when I would go to schools, I would take the videotape with me, and we would show it to the class. And it wasn't the whole process. It was like maybe 10 minutes long, I think, that showed highlights of the sculpture being worked on, the mold being made, and then one being poured in the mold, and the rubber being taken out of the mold, and me putting some paint on it, etc., to kind of talk kids through how masks are made for Halloween. And because of that little videotape, I would say hundreds and hundreds of children in Ohio have seen this mask used as a demonstration, because I would just, you know, put that on a monitor, and then I would just tell them, oh yeah, here's where we put the clay, and here's how we do the plaster, and here's blah 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 blah. So lots of people have seen the making of this mask, even though there aren't that many of them. What a great mask, I think. Good job, Carol Hicks. Well, if you, like me, believe that Carol Hicks should go back to sculpting masks, because she hasn't done any for years now, please contact her, message her on Facebook, and email her, and whatever you have to do. Use you know, smoke signals, or a semaphore code, or a telegraph, or whatever you have to do, and tell her, Carol, please sculpt another mask. And maybe eventually she'll do that, and we'll have more cool monsters like this one, Christopher Lee as the mummy. Beware of mummies, and for Pete's sake, like I keep telling you, stay out of Egyptian tombs with curses on them. You know, I keep telling you that. No good can come of it, right? He says stay out of his tomb if you know what's good for you. Don't worry, don't worry. Whatever you say.